It's a spring afternoon in 2002. In an office in Clinton, Mississippi, a man named Gene Morse is staring at a single line in a phone company's money records. It says the company spent $500 million on computers. Gene's job is to make sure the company's records are honest. He's an auditor. So he looks for the proof, a receipt, a bill, anything. There's nothing. $500 million written down as spent with nothing behind it. He says 3 words to himself, "Oh my gosh." Then he carries the page to his boss. She reads it and says 2 words back, "Keep going." What Gene has found is the first crack in the biggest money lie in American history. The only question left is how big it really is. By the time it's all uncovered, the lie adds up to $11 billion. That's how much money WorldCom, the second biggest long-distance phone company in America, has made up out of thin air. It isn't really earning it. Someone is just typing numbers to make the company look richer than it is. When the truth comes out, WorldCom goes bankrupt. It has to tell a court it can't pay what it owes. It's the biggest company collapse the country has ever seen. The people who owned little pieces of the company, its stock, lose about $180 billion. The stock had been worth more than $60. Soon it's worth pennies. More than 17,000 people lose their jobs, many losing their life savings. None of it was true. But before any of that, there's the woman who told Gene to keep going. Her name is Cynthia Cooper, and she runs the team that checks how WorldCom spends its money. Here's the strange part. Looking at these numbers wasn't even her job. The big money records belonged to one of the most powerful men in the company. And when Cynthia started asking about them, he called her in and told her to stop. We'll come back to what she did and what it cost her. First, how did a phone company from small-town Mississippi get big enough to fool the whole country? To understand WorldCom, you have to understand one man, Bernie Ebbers. He didn't look like the boss of a giant company, and he liked it that way. 6'4", cowboy boots and jeans, running the whole thing from small-town Mississippi. The papers called him the Telecom Cowboy. Before all of this, he delivered milk and coached high school basketball. The company almost started by accident. An idea to sell cheap phone calls, scribbled out in a coffee shop in 1983. And Bernie turned out to be very good at one thing, buying up other companies. Through the 1990s, he bought more than 60 of them. In 1988, he shocked everyone by buying a bigger, older phone giant called MCI for around $40 billion. But the whole thing ran on one fuel, the stock price. Almost every time Bernie bought a company, he paid with WorldCom stock instead of cash. As long as the stock kept rising, he could keep buying. In the year 2000, the fuel started to run out. 2 things went wrong at once. First, the phone business slowed down. Companies had built far more phone and internet lines than people actually needed, betting the internet would grow faster than it did. It didn't, and prices dropped hard. Second, Bernie reached for one more giant deal, joining WorldCom with another big phone company, Sprint, but the government blocked it. Suddenly, the buying spree stalled, the money slowed, and the stock kept falling. The experts who followed WorldCom expected it to earn more every 3 months, like clockwork, and falling short even once could send the stock down fast. Inside the company, people even had a name for the gap between what WorldCom was really making and the bigger number everyone expected. They called it the gap. And Bernie had a secret reason to fear it. For years, he'd borrowed hundreds of millions of dollars against his own WorldCom stock. If the stock fell too far, the banks would come for it. So the gap had to disappear, and someone had to make it disappear. That someone was the man in charge of the company's money, Scott Sullivan. People thought Scott was brilliant, and the trick he used to erase the gap was so simple, it's almost hard to believe it worked. Every month, WorldCom paid other phone companies so it could send calls over phone lines it didn't own. Think of it like rent. When you rent an apartment, the rent is an everyday cost. You pay it, the money's gone, and you're a little poorer that month. WorldCom paid this kind of rent too, and it was huge, billions of dollars a year. Here's what Scott did. Instead of writing that rent down as money spent, he wrote it down as if WorldCom had bought something valuable it would keep for years. The difference between renting an apartment and buying a house. That tiny change matters because everyday costs lower a company's profit, but buying something valuable doesn't. So just by calling its rent buying something valuable, WorldCom made its profits look far bigger than they were. It even gave the trick a name that meant nothing to most people: prepaid capacity. Over 2 years, it hid almost $4 billion of rent this way, and pulled billions more from its rainy day savings on top. In early 2002, WorldCom said it had earned about $130 million in 3 months. Take away the fake numbers and it had actually lost almost $400 million. A loss turned into a profit just by typing. Scott didn't type those fake numbers himself. He passed the orders down to the people below him, and down again to regular accountants who just did what they were told. One of them was a woman named Betty Vinson, an accountant, a wife, a mom, the main person earning money for her family. The first time she was told to type in the fake numbers, she said no. She told her bosses it felt wrong. They said the big bosses didn't want to disappoint the stock market and that everything would be fine. So she did it. Later, someone asked Betty how she even decided which numbers to change. Her answer is hard to forget because it's so small. She said she just picked some out of the air and used a few spreadsheets. That's how $11 billion gets faked, not by a criminal mastermind, by regular people told to fill a gap, who chose not to ask too many questions. It worked because it was too simple to suspect and too big to imagine, right up until a routine check started a few months early. Which brings us back to Cynthia Cooper. That spring, her team decided to take an early look at how the company was spending its money. Almost right away, they hit a wall, that strange phrase, prepaid capacity, that no one could explain. So Cynthia kept asking. She brought in Gene Morse, the auditor from the very beginning, a whiz with computers. He dug through hundreds of thousands of records and kept finding money slid from spent over to valuable stuff we own for no reason at all. Then it got scary. Scott Sullivan heard that they were poking around and asked Cynthia to wait until later in the year. To explain one of the numbers, he used a phrase she'd never heard in any class: a rule of 10. She asked around. It meant nothing. He'd made it up. Cynthia didn't stop, but now her small team was secretly investigating 2 of the most powerful men in the company, while still being paid by them. So they worked at night when the offices were empty. Gene moved into a tiny room with no windows and copied the proof onto disks, afraid someone might try to erase it. By June, they had it. Cynthia laid the whole thing out for the company leaders whose job was to watch the records. The answer was simple: no rule anywhere allowed this. 5 days later, the company fired Scott Sullivan and admitted the truth. It had made its profits look almost $4 billion too big. The next day, the government took it to court, and the lie was only going to grow. So, back to where we started. What did it cost Cynthia Cooper to keep going? She had stood up to 2 of the most powerful men at one of the biggest companies in America and helped bring it down from the inside. It was lonely, frightening work. But that winter, Time magazine put her on its cover as one of its People of the Year, beside 2 other women who'd also spoken up inside their own companies. The woman who was never even supposed to be looking became the reason the truth came out. For almost everyone else, it ended harder. The outside firm paid to check WorldCom's records, which had called them fine, fell apart for good. Bernie Ebbers went on trial, swore he hadn't known, and wasn't believed. 25 years in prison. Scott Sullivan, who admitted his part, got 5. And Betty Vinson got 5 months. The judge called her one of the least guilty people in the whole mess, then added a line that sticks. If she had simply said no, the whole lie might have been stopped before it ever began. There's one last piece, the part that outlived everyone. That summer, the people who write America's laws were already arguing about a new rule to stop companies from lying about their money. But it was stuck. Then WorldCom blew up. On the very same day WorldCom admitted the lie, June 25th, a senator named Paul Sarbanes carried his new rule onto the floor of the Senate. 3 weeks later it passed, 97 votes to 0. By the end of July it was law, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. Enron got all the headlines, but it was WorldCom, the simpler lie and the bigger one, that finally got the law passed. Here's the Compass reading. We tend to think the biggest cheating must be the cleverest. That stealing this much money takes a genius with tricks no normal person could follow. WorldCom proves that wrong. The biggest money lie of its time was, deep down, the simplest trick there is. Take money you spent and pretend you bought something valuable with it. A little kid's trick done at the size of a whole country. Enron hid its lie in a maze. WorldCom hid it in plain sight. And that turns out to be the more dangerous place to hide. Because the most dangerous lie usually isn't the one nobody can understand. It's the one so simple and so huge that nobody bothers to check it. Because everyone just assumes a company that big would never dare to do something that obvious. But WorldCom dared, for $11 billion. And in the end, it took a few regular people working late in a room with no windows to prove that the simplest answer was the true one all along. If you want more stories where one small lie turns into a financial disaster, hit like, leave a comment, and subscribe for the next Wall Street Autopsy.